Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Life of Waste podcast series. I'm here today with Professor René Véron, whom you already met at the very first and the second episodes of the podcast. Today, before we proceed with our podcast series, I would like to bid you a warm welcome, and from wherever you are joining us today, whether it's a morning or whether it's evening, or whether you are going for a walk. Thank you so much for listening to us. And also, I would like to correct the fact that in the last podcast episode, I said that Sudarshan's episode was the episode number 7, but actually it's episode number 8. So this would be episode number 9. And for this episode, we have René with us again. Hello, René. How are you?
Hi, Malit. I'm very well, thanks. And hello to everybody.
So, René, you might remember last time we spoke about the R4D project's outcomes and why he started the project in the first place, and why the countries were selected and the key findings. Now, this time around, after much discussion, we thought it would be also nice for us to discuss about the waste management system in Switzerland, because in both the countries, in both the projects, the Spirit and the R4D, Switzerland has been the main partner. And of course, René and of course our other principal investigator, Professor Sweta Rawat-Danaka, is also coming from Switzerland, from HESO. And we thought it would be very useful to our listeners who are interested in waste management around the world, how waste management activities are carried out in Switzerland. So because René has lots of experience about it, we thought it would be better if we invite René to discuss about it. So René, thank you again for joining with us. Shall we start by discussing, like basically outlining how waste management happens in Switzerland?
Good, I will try that. And I might start by saying that I started to work on waste management in South Asia before I ever studied this issue in Switzerland. So just as a citizen of Switzerland, I knew a little bit of how waste management is organized. And then actually only later I also looked at, with a small project, looked at waste management in Switzerland. But I probably look at it a bit differently than most of my peers in Switzerland. I look at it actually from a southern lens, because I have my prime interest and prime experiences from South Asia, and a little bit also from Central Africa. So I have quite a different perspective of the case in Switzerland. So how it is managed? I mean, when you walk around in Switzerland, everything looks very nice and clean. And some people would have said, well, yeah, it's just because of the behavior. The Swiss are very disciplined. They have social norms, social practices, so that they don't litter, which is, of course, in part true, but it's not the whole story. And there's lots of investment that goes into sweeping, into keeping our grounds clean, and so on and so forth. I think that this aspect is also quite important. So how does it work in general? In general, we also have kind of door-to-door waste collection, maybe once a week for kind of general waste. It would be collected from the doorstep once or twice, sometimes 3 times. However, we are perhaps the world champions, so we hope to be the world champions in segregating waste at source. So one is the collection of kind of general wastes for which we pay a tax, and the tax is based on the bags, that quantity of how much we produce. So the more you produce, the higher tax you pay. Then there's very often also collection once a week, perhaps, of cardboard, paper together, There is probably less of a collection, or in only some places, a collection of organic wastes, kitchen wastes, and so on and so forth. So lots of the wastes we then bring, let's say plastics or metals or hard plastics, PET bottles, batteries, and so on and so forth, we can bring to general collection points. And one interesting thing about Switzerland is that there's an obligation for shops who, sell you products that are nicely wrapped and packaged and so on and so forth. They have to take back a large part of the waste materials as well. So when you go to a supermarket, there's very often also a corner where you can actually drop things, bottles, glass, or batteries, and so on and so forth, because they have to take it back. So that's maybe something kind of specific for Switzerland. Do you want to, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the thing from the consumer point of view, right, of how it is done.
Yeah.
But then later on, most Swiss citizens would probably, or Swiss residents probably would not quite know what happens with the waste later on, because thanks to lots of investments, we managed to make the waste quite invisible. So we don't quite know, most of us don't quite know what happens later on with it. So waste that is not recycled in Switzerland is incinerated. I think since the 1990s or so, there's no landfills for general household waste anymore. That's kind of banned in all over Switzerland. So we have the incinerators that take care of this residual wastes. And they're, of course, highly monitored and with kind of sophisticated systems of filtration and so on and so forth. They happen in that way. One particularity about the Swiss system is that the waste management is varying very highly from one municipality to the next one. So when you ask me about waste management in Switzerland, I cannot give one answer. Yeah, there would be hundreds of answers because it varies. So the federal law just gives of the general framework. Then we have the cantonal laws that give a framework that is a little bit more specific. And then sort of the municipalities come up with their own systems that, are more or less in line with the legal frameworks at other levels.
Yeah, and René, because you touched upon a very interesting point, because I was about to ask you actually much later in the podcast about this, in Sri Lanka, as our audience already know now, there's this conflict between the centralized and decentralized bodies, institutions, in terms of who generates the policies and to whom should the people should listen to, and who decides what happens. There's this confusion. So, René, how does it work in Switzerland? Like, to whom should the people listen to? Is it the cantons, or is it the local, the city councils? How does it work there?
I mean, primarily to the city councils. Our kind of system of decentralization or federal state is very long-standing, and so with the laws, it's quite clear to the different actors where they fall in that kind of system. And it's really at the federal level, it's not really a centralized level. It's the general laws around waste management, they're really very general. I mean, one of the guiding principles, as I've told you before, that there's no landfilling anymore of household wastes in Switzerland. That is probably sort of one of the most concrete articles of that law. Otherwise, it just gives some general principles. I mean, sort of general principles of a circular economy. However, how that is then implemented, that has to be kind of specified in cantonal law. And also in cantonal law, I mean, if I take the example of the canton of Vaud, where I'm residing in Western French-speaking Switzerland, it basically gives some mandate that organic wastes should be reutilized, reused, recycled in whatever way is possible. And that gives quite a huge scope for the municipalities. And it's actually quite a good system, because depending on whether you're, let's say, in a rural municipality or in an urban municipality, the appropriate system might be a different one. So I'll give you a quick example. Lausanne, you don't have that much space, so lots of organic kitchen waste is actually collected and then brought to not a composting plant, but to a centralized biomethanization plant. In more rural parts, I lived before in a village, and there the commune said they still adhered to the cantonal law, but they did not very much for the collection. So no organic waste, kitchen wastes were collected. But the commune basically just said, well, it's the responsibility of every household to do their own composting in their own garden. Right? I mean, I don't know how many percent of the households did that, probably not a very large percentage, but nevertheless, that was the official policy. And the canton basically accepted that as adherence to the general law. Just a village next door, I mean, literally 5 kilometers, maybe only 3 kilometers away, they thought, well, no, that's not good enough just to, delegate all the responsibilities to the households. We actually we engage in waste collection, also of organic kitchen wastes, and we send it then to a centralized plants. So that's what I'm saying. There's lots of variation from one place to another. Which is on the one hand very positive, because it's then also sort of debated in the communal council. It is sometimes adapted to the topography, to the socioeconomic factors of that place. These are the advantages. There's also disadvantages of that system. That means that it can sort of lead to confusion. So when you, let's say as a student, right, you grow up at your parents' house in a village, then you move maybe to a city like Lausanne, and so on and so forth. So you're quite used maybe to the recycling practices, what can be recycled, how, of your village, and then you come to Lausanne and the rules are different. Of course, you get sometimes some brochures or a waste calendar that gives you some general information, but you think that you already know from your village how to do it in that place, and that's sometimes difficult. So when each time you move, you have to actually relearn your waste practices because they're really different from one place to another.
So that's really interesting, because I have hundreds of questions regarding this, because in Sri Lanka, when you have as you already know, when there are multiple bodies involved in waste management or anything in general, that one body actually stops the other body from functioning, and there's lots of duplication that happens. But it seems that Switzerland have somehow managed to overcome that. So that's quite interesting for me as a Sri Lankan. And also, Penny, I thought, because I got the chance to spend some time in Switzerland, thanks to you guys at the R4D. One thing that I realized was that this is my sort of perspective on Swiss waste management. That is, first and foremost, as you said, the typography and the climate of Switzerland really helps you out in terms of managing waste. I think so. When you compare our listeners, the waste management in Sri Lanka, when it's a humid weather, when there's lots of rain and so much sunshine is involved, waste actually has to be treated in a different manner. And of course, there's so much dust and everything everywhere. It's simply because of our geography and where we are located. But in Switzerland, in general, dust is not a common thingy. And in general, also in terms of waste disposal, because that's one of the the questions that I'm sort of bringing René to in the upcoming, then as the next question, I didn't really see waste management. For me, for a person who spent about 2 weeks in Switzerland in different parts of the country, being unable to see Switzerland, Switzerland's waste management system sort of gave me this idea whether have they hidden it. Why can't I see it? Because I stayed in multiple hotels and I traveled by train to multiple places from Lausanne to Zurich to in between, and then in none of these places I did see a waste management truck or anybody. But I did see one person doing waste management. That was an old lady who was segregating. I think she was segregating glasses. And I also found out that you can't do nothing on Sunday, especially throwing away bottles and all. So shall we touch on these specifics as well? And also, shall we talk about a little bit if it is applicable, this invisibilization of waste management? Is it the thing, really?
Yeah, I think you're quite right. I mean, I could guide you through Swiss cities and show you where the wastes are, but you need a guide like me who is obsessed with waste to actually find it. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Yeah, no, I mean it's really a paradox, right? On the one hand, the waste production in Switzerland is very high per capita. Huge amounts, certainly more than double, probably 3 or 4 times the waste production in a country like Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you don't see waste very easily. It's invisibilized. Okay, so one thing is, of course, of the waste trucks, they would pass quite early in the morning. And particularly if you have you would have to get up quite early to see the waste trucks and the waste work that is being done. So there's a time, the temporal dimension to it. Then of course it's particularly invisibilized also by quite a lot of technology. And maybe you have not even noticed, but rather than having manual work and sweepers in the street, you have little machines that sweep the roads, that clean them also with water and so on and so forth. And again, you would see these machines mostly in the morning and not otherwise, so that when people in the morning go to work, that the streets are nice and clean, and the garbage bags that are brought to the curbside, that they are already picked up by the time they leave their houses.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of collection. Then in terms of treatment, it is also quite invisibilized. Let's take the example of organic wastes, right? So you first of all, you try to contain the organic wastes in containers. If you have to bring it somewhere, they're nicely contained in containers. From the outside, you don't necessarily, it doesn't smell necessarily. You don't really realize that the container is full of organic, rotting, decomposing kitchen waste. And you're quite right to say we have a climatic advantage that at least in the winter months or so, waste is not decomposing that fast as in the case of Sri Lanka. So it has not to be collected as frequently and so on and so forth. That is definitely true. But then from those containers, they'll be also picked up by trucks. And then that kitchen waste would be going to a centralized biomethanization plant. And, the majority of the population here would not know would not know where this biomethanization plant is. It's maybe just people living near the plant, they would know about it. There's like in South Asia, also NIMBY opposition to these plants, even though, I mean, on the level of smells produced, it's quite minimal. It's really, really minimized. It's really not a big deal. When you pass the plant, you would not necessarily know that this is a waste facility. It looks quite clean outside, quite modern, and so it's also invisibilized from that point of view. And of course, also the products that you have in the end, they do not resemble in any way the kitchen waste that you had as the input, right? You have like pellets that you can use as fertilizer. You have the methane that is being produced as a gas from which then you produce electricity. So it's a different thing that you have at the end. It's not like compost, something that's still a little bit dirty that might remind you of the base material. It's something very different. It's electricity. It's kind of very clean, neat-looking pellets for fertilizers. So it's a totally different scenario in that sense. So because of that, the layperson, in a way, the average citizen here, the average resident, is quite distantiated from the waste. We really managed through technology and investments to distantiate ourselves from the waste. And that's probably also a reason why we are not quite aware of the amounts of waste that we're producing, because we then don't see it. And on one hand, it's good, right? It's a very sanitary system. But on the other hand, on the level of awareness, it doesn't help us very much. So it gives not any incitations to try and reduce wastes, because the wastes disappear somewhere. They're really, I mean, you yourself and Nishara, they have written about this idea also in Sri Lanka, that you try to move waste out of sight and then out of mind. So in Switzerland, we really manage that. to move waste out of sight and therefore also out of mind. But that means that the waste reduction is a big challenge for Switzerland.
And René, now actually I should have asked this question much earlier. Now, for our viewers to get an idea about how waste management happens, now in Sri Lanka, as Sri Lankans knows, and as a Sri Lankan researcher who's interested in waste management knows, what we do is we have designated days of disposal of waste. Now, in the area that I live in currently, they only collect non-biodegradable waste. We are supposed to segregate waste into the waste that perishes and then waste that does not perishes. And the waste that does not perish, we have to take care of it, because I live somewhat far from the central city, from the capital city, Colombo. So we do have lots of space. And on every Monday, the waste collection truck comes to our area and collects the waste collection, the non-perishable waste, stuff like plastics and covers and stuff. How does it happen in René, in Switzerland, René, in Lausanne, maybe in your area? Could you please enlighten our listeners and our viewers about how would you go about managing waste at home? As in, do you have to purchase something specific like a bag or something, or a sticker for the waste? And how do you segregate waste? Because I know I had the chance to go to the University of Lausanne to visit René. We had a bit of a lecture there and all that. And I saw that there's I think about 11 to 12 different holes to put different stuff in terms of segregation. How does that work? How would you go about managing waste at home?
Yeah, we're almost as good as the Japanese, who have about 30 different types of
Oh my
waste. Yeah.
God, 30.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. No. Yeah, I mean, that comes off to the recycling, which starts, of course, with waste sorting in your own house. So yes, I would personally, in our house, there may be we put things maybe in 3 or 4 different bags. One for paper and cardboard, one for plastics, but in the municipality I live now, we can only recycle PET bottles, but some hard plastics also, but it's quite limited what you can do with the plastics. one bag for glasses, one bag for metals, tin cans, and so on and so forth. So yeah, you would have a place for the different wastes. I have a little composting bin as well that then I bring into a collection point and so on and so forth. Yeah, so there's these different bags that you would have. And then from time to time, you go and empty these. I mean, cardboard is being picked up, but the other recyclables are not picked up. So either you go to the central municipal collection point, particularly when you have also some kind of little bit bigger items or accumulated lots of items and so on and so forth. Or otherwise, they have what they call some eco points. These are sort of small neighborhood level collection points where you can bring things. You can also bring textiles there, for example, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that is sort of done for the kind of recyclables. So you see there's still a degree of responsibilization of the residents. And that's of course also linked to the fact that in Switzerland, labor costs are so high that you could not ask somebody to do the job. Like in Sri Lanka, it's the informal sector that is very often taking care of that. In Switzerland, with some exceptions, you would find people also in the street, looking for a glass and so on and so forth, but it's extremely rare. It's rather the exception than the rule, just because, therefore people have to do the sorting themselves and then take care of the different waste streams themselves. Then one waste stream, which is nevertheless quite important, is whatever the rest is, right? Things that you cannot recycle, thin plastics, for example, plastics that are soiled, cardboard that is soiled with food rests, and so on and so forth. So what happens with these is you put them in a bag, in a plastic bag, and the plastic bag you have to buy at the supermarket or elsewhere, and on that plastic bag there's a tax. So you don't pay just for the material of the plastic and the bag in itself, but you pay a tax. It's maybe 2 francs, 3 francs per bag. That's 35 liters or so. And then you put everything into that bag, and then you bring it to the curb, and it is picked up twice a week, for example, from your curbside. So the idea behind this is that, since you pay a tax on it, you have an economic incentive to reduce all the residual waste. That should be an incentive to sort waste, right? That is in place in every canton in Switzerland, except for the canton of Geneva for the time being still. And, people do say that waste that goes to the incinerator has been reduced thanks to this. Yeah, so that's sort of the general kind of system from the perspective of a household.
I thought, René, it's important to ask that question, even though I should have asked it earlier, simply so that to get to know about the waste management system and how it works, you either have to go there, and just like me, who have been there and who haven't seen it, how the waste management happens, it's always better to get to know from somebody who lives there how it happens. And in terms of waste management, René, I think you wrote about 2 important points while discussing about how the waste management happens, and especially just before you just said that these sort of waste tax sort of have implicated the amount of waste that goes to the incinerators. So from my little research, and of course, thank you for sharing those 2 papers on MSWM in Switzerland, I found out that nearly 48% of the waste that is generated in terms of organic waste, and some of the waste that cannot be recycled further are incinerated. Now, I also found out that since early 2000s, as you said, the landfilling has been completely stopped. And as a person who is interested in waste in Switzerland and as a person who have studied waste management in South Asia for a very long time, and as a person who has lived in a country where waste management has been primarily done, significantly done using incinerators for about nearly now 24 years. What do you think of incineration?
Well, I think it really depends on the context, right? And
Mhm,
I think also of a country like Sri Lanka, the country is changing, right? You don't have the same waste composition that you have 40 or 50 years ago.
mhm,
So waste incineration really does not make much sense if you have very low quantities of waste in general, and
mhm,
then at the same time high proportion of organic biodegradable wastes. Because with biodegradable waste, this is the issue that you have lots of water in that, and you actually need energy to incinerate it. So if you have a waste composition that has basically no wet waste in it, it's all dry
mhm.
plastics, you have a high calorific value. You
Mhm.
don't need, the waste burns on its own once it's started. So you
Yeah.
don't have to fuel the incinerator, it's self-fueling, right? And you can produce kind of energy and reduce the ash, then what you still have, have to still landfill the residue at the end. So for a country like Switzerland, it's not a bad thing. It's
Mhm,
I would say it's not a bad thing.
mhm,
If you told me that we should build an incinerator in a country like Nepal, I would be a little bit more hesitant to say that would be a good idea, because the
mhm,
waste volumes are low. Most of it is biodegradable. You should look at kind of more decentralized solutions, and so on and so forth. So yeah, coming back maybe sort of to Switzerland, another factor there is of course also that these waste incinerators are highly monitored,
mhm,
technologically quite sophisticated. Uh, they can have problems.
mhm.
And if you don't attend to these problems very quickly, then you have a very dangerous air pollution, dioxins, for example.
Yeah.
And it's then once it's in the air, or once water is polluted, it's it's very difficult to get that out of of nature, of the ecosystem anymore. When you have it's in a solid state, it's a little bit easier
Mhm,
to deal with all that. So if you are in a context where maybe the financial situation is not as such that you can have a highly sophisticated monitoring and repair system, a waste incinerator is rather a dangerous proposition,
mhm,
right? So in the case of Switzerland, that is perhaps not such a big issue. Having said that, we have also a case in Switzerland that's relating back to history. In the 1950s and the 1960s, when incinerators started to come about here and started to replace in part landfilling, there were incinerators with filters that were highly deficient. So dioxins were still emitted in the atmosphere. And quite recently, a couple years ago, there has been some research on soils, urban soils in Lausanne. And it was found that urban soils in Lausanne, close to these former incinerators, are highly contaminated with dioxins.
oh,
And what is the problematic thing is that often urban gardens are located in that,
okay.
in that perimeter.
Mhm,
And a whole question about the safety of homegrown food has come up. And there's of course also initiatives here to promote urban agriculture, for example. But how far can you go in promoting this when your soils are contaminated? And
mhm,
so it's you see also sort of in our context. I mean, we have sort of kind of historical legacy of incinerators that are causing problems still today, and it's
mhm,
highly debated. So it is being said that these modern incinerators would not cause the same problem, but of course, you still have to afterwards do something with the filters. You displace to some extent the issues of pollution. So it's not a silver bullet solution by all means.
Yeah, it's very true. I should have actually when I asked you the question, I should have phrased it better, as in these modern incinerators have been there in Switzerland since 2000s, but the very first incinerator, according to literature, came up in 1904. So almost 124 years back. So because the main reason, René, that I asked you that question is that because in our R4D project, we got the opportunity to not just focus ourselves in the ULM Mount Lavinia Municipal Council area and the Burlescamo Council area, but rather we got the opportunity to travel around the country and also see how waste management is taking place in the different places, in different provinces, including the mountainous center of the country and the coastal part of the country as well. So it seems to me that most of the local councils are pondering the thought of introducing incineration as a last and final resolution point. Now, as you touched briefly in your answer, that how it would not work for Sri Lanka, considering the volume and also the need for a very close monitoring system. I would also like to add a little bit to that, René. That's because I think another thing that would concern me would be the amount of money that you have to spend when it comes to incineration. So it's extremely expensive. Not just in Switzerland, we have our neighbor, India, doing incineration at a significant level, especially thanks to another funding opportunity from the Swiss National Science Foundation, specific for the R4D projects. We got involved in the project called TEC, and I was fortunate enough to visit Kerala. This was about 2-3 years back in 2022, and I got the opportunity to see the incinerators in Kiel, in Kerala itself, and they are monstrous machines with so much technology. And I then and there realized that this is not going to work for Sri Lanka. And on the other hand, it's this idea that incineration, our dear viewers, has no waste at all is not true. It do generate a level of concentrated waste, which is highly toxic, and you have to manage them in different pits, so that the contaminants do not leak into the outer environment. Especially in the case of India, in Kiel, the waste management as in incineration of waste management happens only if it is biomedical waste. Managing it in a different way is impossible. So incinerators for Sri Lanka, I don't know how that would pan out, but it seems that most of the local councils are pondering on it. And René, also because we spoke about this de-responsibilization of waste management, and as you spoke about how in Sri Lanka the waste is managed in such a way that it is out of sight, out of mind. Can we talk about the implications of this? You briefly touched on this, how it implicates waste management in general. But I think we can elaborate a little bit more on to get to know your view, how this de-responsibilization can affect waste management in general. I think it goes from generation to policy development through the whole range.
Yeah, I think it's the effect of this is just that waste is no longer seen as a problem. And waste can be seen as a problem at different levels, of course. So one is the kind of production of lots of waste is, of course, wasting resources. There's each time transformation of natural resources, and with waste, always recover all the materials, all the energy. There's the law of entropy that is playing a role. So if you don't see the waste, then you're not aware of your own consumption and own wasteful practices. That is definitely an issue. If it's out of sight, out of mind, there's of course also then no incentives for the politicians to do something about waste. So that's one thing that is quite interesting. Also for me, having worked in South Asia, where waste can become quite easily politicized and a political issue. That is absolutely not the case in Switzerland. And perhaps it should be more of a political issue, right? But it would not be the cleanliness, but it would be more our kind of wasteful use of resources. Then, of course, another dimension why waste can be a problem is linked to the waste work, right? And we have seen in South Asia on landfills, but also in the streets, lots of waste workers who have to work under very unhygienic conditions for very little money. It's really very, very hard. So there's also a question of dignified jobs. In Switzerland, it's, having been sensibilized, and that's why I'm saying that I have sort of a southern lens on waste management in Switzerland, having been sensitized through that experience in Sri Lanka and in other South Asian countries. I've also asked my question, well, who are the waste workers here in Switzerland? And I'm observing a little bit, and in Switzerland, I have not done that in a systematic way, right? I have not done any research on that, but it seems to be these are kind of easy entry jobs into the waste, and it's mostly for migrants. Immigrants to Switzerland, it's maybe their first jobs here in Switzerland. It's a hard job as well, even though, they have protective gear and everything. You still stand on the truck, you still have to go on and off the truck. Sometimes it's a bit dangerous with the traffic that's coming on and all of that. So yeah, the component still is here as well. And I want to come back to Kerala. You talked about Kerala in South India. And yes, I mean, they have incinerators, but in some cities, for example, the city of Alapura in the southern part of Kerala holds also some other lessons and some other models where they have a very decentralized way of waste management, where you see waste processing facilities in the neighborhood, and people have to go into the facility actually to sort their wastes and dispose it in the right bin. And they see a composting at the site. They actually see what happens with their waste. And that is also generating awareness about their own productions. That's just the opposite. And I often think, and I have also written about that in a blog, that Swiss cities could learn actually quite a lot from that experience in Aleppo to make waste actually a bit more visible. And so to educate ourselves through our daily routines, what we produce, how much waste we are producing. And I talked earlier on about the eco points here in Switzerland that are also at the neighborhood level. So it's quite, from that point of view, quite similar what we see in Aleppo. However, there is a big difference between Aleppo and an eco point here in Switzerland. In the eco point here, we put things in a hole and we don't see what's inside the container.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's invisibilized, even at that kind of very banal level. And in Aleppo, you see it. You see the compost. You see the things rotting there. It's just each time you go there, it's a lesson in solid waste management. And in Switzerland, we don't get that. And I think that it really does mean that there's no break to kind of wasteful consumption behaviors.
I think, thank you, René, for bringing that up. It brought back my memories quite a lot, even compared to Sri Lanka, René. I think the way waste is managed in India is quite straightforward. You would see, for our audience, of course, René has been in India for a very long time, starting from his PhD studies and multiple visits because of multiple projects. But for our viewers, I got to see that how open they are about waste management. Usually their aeroben composting sites would actually be on side of the road. Now here in Sri Lanka, even our waste management facilities such as Karadiana is actually quite hidden. You have to if you have to go there if you want to see it. But in at least in India, in the parts that I ventured in, yeah, it's quite out there. You can simply go and have a look. In especially in Alleppey, I think they've done a wonderful job by getting the community involved. The person who's looking after the European system is actually a community member. So it's also quite an interesting thing for us to learn how it is important to make people responsible, because ultimately you have yourself to be responsible to, and you have somebody from the community to answer to if you don't do it properly. So that's actually quite an interesting thing, as you pointed out. And René, just before we finish the discussion, I think we can go on about discussing it. I just have a question after going through the literature and, of course, from my experiences in India and Sri Lanka. I see that in multiple places, the Swiss waste management system has been sort of given this pinnacle sort of recognition to be an ideal sort of waste management system. But I also see that compared to now you did talk about recycling a lot, but it seems that the recycling sort of is limited to organic waste management, especially when it comes to creating pellets that can be utilized as fertilizer, or of course to recycle cardboards and all. But compared to India, especially, the amount of recycling and upcycling they do is, I think, comparatively, this is my personal opinion, I think the Indian system is way better. Things are out in the open, everything is recycled, every possible thing is recycled. And I think as Sri Lankans also, we can learn a lot on not wasting and also utilizing resources again and again and again. Because one of the things that I understood, and I don't know how correct I am in this regard, recycling is also sort of a short-term hoax in a way, because there's a limit. Like even the most recycled product has a lifespan, and there are a number of times that you can recycle something. So even the recycled item that has been produced in the best possible way actually has a very short lifespan in a sense, and then ultimately it ends up in an incinerator in the case of Switzerland, and here in Sri Lanka it would end up in a landfill. So what do you think, René? Should we idealize the Swiss waste management system just because it looks nice, or how should we go about?
No, I'm very critical. Definitely, it's not a model for other countries, and yeah, as you say, it looks very good at first glance. It looks, it's clean. It's yeah, it's all nicely hidden. However, also with the recycling, yeah, I'm also very critical about that. I mean, of course, it's better than just throwing it directly into a landfill or
Yeah.
into an incinerator. I mean, it's absolutely no question. However, it is not a solution. It's a second best solution of, in the first instance, not to produce the waste. That is of course important. And I think in a context of a country of the global north, I think important steps will have to be done in terms of working with industry, working with the private sector to change packaging. That either reduce the packaging, definitely avoid packaging that is of kind of mix between cardboard and plastics, or avoid packaging that are plastics that really are one-use plastics, but I mean, of course, again, mostly reduce the amount of packaging, or then seek solutions of having a biodegradable packaging and so on and so forth. I think there's a huge potential there to do much better in the context of the global north, and I do believe actually that some private sector companies would be quite interested in that as well, in order to become a carbon neutral in the near future. Yeah, so Switzerland is definitely not a model for other countries to follow.
Thank you so much, René. The main reason that I asked, because It seems to me that everywhere, especially not in the academic literature, but in general literature, Swiss system of waste management sort of is upheld as a green economy where so much of electric vehicles and also even I saw a few references to how the electricity generated by burning incinerating waste is utilized for about 5% of the heating in the country and 3% of the electricity use, which is apparently the second highest use of renewable energy in Switzerland. So there are lots of stories, some references from highly venerated international non-government organizations. So I just wanted to clear that up for the listeners and viewers, because ultimately the aim of our projects is to be academically coherent and also to bring out what is actually hidden and that is not really seen. So thank you so much, René, for helping us do that today in this episode. It's always a pleasure talking to you. We always do learn new things. And do you have anything else, René, before we finish off to say about the Swiss waste management system, or anything that you would like to discuss about waste management in Switzerland?
I think we did address most of the things. Maybe one final point, maybe so to make. I mean, you say about the generation of electricity, and maybe you have not talked very much about the alternative to composting of organic waste, which is this biomethanization. That works basically like your stomach, but just at a larger scale, more or less. And it's definitely an interesting thing. And I'm not saying that it is in the context of Switzerland necessarily a bad thing, right? However, it's a little bit like everything. We solve lots of issues with sophisticated technology here. And very often that works, but sometimes that also doesn't work. So if these biomethanization plants, for example, they can fail. So we become actually quite vulnerable to that technology and its failure. And when it does not work, I'm not quite sure what happens with our organic wastes during those times. I just know that these plants sometimes do not run properly. So yeah, so the technology is helping us to, distantiate ourselves, let's say, from the natural cycles. However, it's also highly kind of vulnerable and a risky strategy. So yeah, that's maybe sort of something that I wanted to add, and that's also sort of one should also reflect in the context of Sri Lanka and other South Asian countries before introducing highly sophisticated technology. Think about, well, is there other technology out there that might do the job as well, or even better?
Even better.
So yeah, that's maybe sort of the last point that I wanted to make. But otherwise, the pleasure was all mine, and thank you so much for leading this podcast series and also for including an episode on Switzerland.
It's always a pleasure, René. Thank you so much for the opportunity to do a podcast, which is quite unusual for, I think, for projects of this nature, as in very much academic projects. We often really don't focus on disseminating information in this format. So thank you so much to you and also to the NSF for that opportunity, for being very open-minded and very flexible. NSF throughout these projects that I've been involved in has been nothing but flexible, open-minded and supportive. So thank you, National Science Foundation of Switzerland, for supporting the projects and of course giving us the freedom to work as we would like. And also, René, thank you so much for joining today's episode. Again, we'll be joining with René in the future as well, because we have much to talk about, especially with regards to the Spirit project, the ongoing project. There's so much to talk about, so much of new findings to discuss on. So thank you again, René, for joining. And thank you so much for the audience for listening to us. I do hope that you join with us in the upcoming episodes, because we have really good stuff coming up in the upcoming episodes, especially with our Indian partners' contribution. We'll be talking a lot about things that we touched upon today, especially waste management in Alleppey. We have been very lucky to have and researcher, Professor N.C. Narayan, who's an esteemed individual in the waste management systems in Kerala specifically, and especially in Alleppey. He's a known name in Alleppey. You can't go anywhere without getting his name through. So thank you so much, René, again for joining. Thank you so much for listening to our audience. See you in the next episode. Thank you so much.